Hi everybody, I'm going to do yet another video talking about humanism and these common misconceptions of it, namely this god-awful phrase, I'm not a feminist, I'm a humanist, this nonsensical phrase. A lot of people seem to ask this question of, Jacqueline Glenn asked it recently, although she has since been corrected. I think she's accepted her error. Is that this phrase, people seem to be confusing humanism with humanitarianism. They seem to think that somehow a humanist just means the same as a humanitarian. Humanism contains a lot of the values of humanitarianism. Humanism includes humanitarianism within its tenets. But humanism means something a bit more than that. Humanism is a non-religious worldview and moral philosophy that, among other things, stresses acceptance of the scientific method. And then, of course, it includes things like humanitarianism. It stresses human rights, needs, and welfare. But it also stresses human experience, which sounds a bit hippy-dippy-ish. But that sort of means, that we experience connections and relationships with other human beings. We don't experience anything divine. We don't have relationships with deities or anything like that. Humanists accept that our relationships and our experience is as a human being with other human beings, and there's nothing supernatural coming into that. And if we have any duty, of course, it is to other human beings. And that's the way it goes. I mean, there are certain objections to this that come from some people seem to accuse it of excluding animal rights, but there's no reason a person can't be a humanist and also be an animal rights activist or something like that. So we don't need to think humanists are automatically don't care about animals, but also humanists, by nature of what they are, recognise they're part of something bigger. They're part of an environment, part of an ecosystem, and have to respect that ecosystem, which would include the other things that live in it. So a good case could be made that humanists should also be animal rights advocates, or at least people who oppose animal cruelty. Although that's, I'm saying a case could be made. I'm not saying that's necessarily what everyone thinks. But even if we take the term humanitarian, people say, well, why call yourself a feminist? Why not just call yourself a humanitarian? Well, we could say the same to LGBT rights activists, couldn't we? Or we could say the same to people who are opposed to racism. So why don't you just call yourself a humanitarian? For these people to just call themselves humanitarians would imply that the issues they're fighting for are so small and so tiny that they can just easily be accomplished. Their goals can easily be accomplished just as a happy byproduct of something else. And that's not really the case. Gay rights, LGBT rights, is a big enough issue that it requires a focus group. It requires a specific subset of humanitarians who focus on it, who have a particular interest in it. So if someone's a humanitarian, to me, it automatically follows that they also support things like feminism, and they support things like LGBT rights, and they support civil rights, i.e. the opposition to racism, and so on. Basically anything that concerns human rights of any kind, they would be supportive of it. But they may have a focus within that. They may be a feminist, or they may be an LGBT rights activist, or whatever. But to me, these things are subsets of humanitarianism, which is the broader umbrella term for people who have a concern for human rights. But going back to this confusion with humanism, again, I mean, there are lots of humanitarians who aren't humanists, because some humanitarians are religious. For example, Desmond Tutu is a very celebrated humanitarian who's obviously a Christian. And there are some feminists who are religious as well. Now, I know obviously there's a lot of apparent contradiction there. If you read things like the Bible or the Quran, these obviously don't come across as feminist texts, but as we all know, a lot of people don't practice their religion to the letter. In fact, I don't think really anybody does. So contradiction has never really stood in the way of people sort of putting together two contradictory worldviews. People seem quite happy to do that. So we couldn't just say all feminists are, to tell all feminists to start calling themselves humanists, because humanism, as I said, is a non-religious moral philosophy, and feminism doesn't necessarily require you to be non-religious. There are, like I say, Christian feminists and Islamic feminists and so on. So again, because of the secular requirement of humanism, feminism cannot just be subsumed by humanism. But humanitarianism, yes, I'd accept it is something of a subset of that. But again, the issue that feminists are fighting for, which is sort of the equality of women, is a big enough issue that it requires a specific subset of humanitarians who are going to focus on that, and we call them feminists. So this idea that all these issues are just so small that they'll all just happily be accomplished by one movement, it's not the case. These issues are big issues. They require specific focus groups of people who are going to focus on these issues. So I hope that maybe clears things up a little bit for people there. I will put a link in the description to the IHEU's Amsterdam Declaration, which I think really outlines humanism in the modern world. It pretty much explains exactly the tenets of humanism. By the way, I just wanted to address something here. If I never claim to be an expert in this kind of thing. I'm just a very enthusiastic fan of it, should we say. I'm a big fan of humanism. I find it very interesting, but I've never claimed to be an expert in it. I don't mind it if people want to correct me about it, but if you're going to correct me, I'm going to bring up a couple of screen grabs here. If you correct me in the manner this person has done here, I'm not going to take kindly to it. I'm going to find it quite rude. Now, I'm just going to bring a couple of screen grabs here. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Basically, I've said here at the bottom of this post that humanism is not compatible with libertarianism, anti-feminism, race realism, social Darwinism, or any such similar repugnant beliefs we often see among atheists. And we get some more on here. Bring up atheism plus. This has nothing to do with atheism plus. Secular humanism has existed a lot longer than atheism plus ever has. But if I bring up this other screen grab, if I can find it, yeah, there we are. Now we have someone here complaining that I've said humanism is not compatible with libertarianism. What we got says who. First of all, progressives do not own the term, and various definitions of the word exist in different contexts. Just because a bunch of authoritarian leftists made a declaration, for some reason the word declaration here has been put in inverted commas. I don't see why there's anything unreal about the Amsterdam Declaration. When you put a word in inverted commas, usually it means that the word is inaccurate in some way. The declaration, however much you may or may not agree with it, is a declaration. But we move on. It doesn't mean progressives get to define it from here on out. Libertarianism and liberalism both stem from the same philosophical tree outlined by J.S. Mill. If you define humanism as basic respect for individual agency, which in the political context is its foundation, then you have to include libertarianism. If putting it in the same list as race realism is fucking just flat out race baiting, shame on you, blah blah blah. I'm not putting it in the same category as race realism. I'm just saying these are a bunch of views. The list I gave are just a bunch of views held by certain atheists which are not compatible with humanism. That's all I'm saying. I'm not necessarily saying being a libertarian, excuse me, is as bad as being a race realist. Although I would say there's a hell of a lot of crossover there. Most race realists and MRAs and other such people tend to be libertarians, from what in my experience anyway. But this definition here, now, I've asked, I think, here quite reasonably. I've said, could I have a source for this? This definition here, if you define humanism as basic respect for individual agency, which is the political context of its foundation. Now, I've read a lot about humanism. I've never heard that particular definition before. I know there are other uses of the word, such as there's various educational philosophies which are called humanism, hence the term humanities. Certain subjects are called humanities, but that's obviously not what we're referring to here. You know, we're not in that context. It's a very, very different context. So I'm just asking for a source here. I don't think that's unreasonable of me to ask for a source. I've never, I've read a lot about humanism. I've never heard that particular definition. And I do also make clear here, but libertarianism, I'm using the modern sort of Ron Paul brand of it. In America, that tends to be what people seem to mean when they say libertarian. They're talking about this Ron Paul type of politics, which from what I can gather just seems to be fiscally conservative but socially liberal. And to me, to be honest, just comes across as an attempt to justify selfishness. Really, it's just like how we're really selfish, but we want to try and make that come across as some sort of philosophical, political belief. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about something like libertarian socialism, which I understand is completely different. I understand there's actually a lot of different types of libertarianism, a lot of which have nothing to do with Ron Paul or anything, or Ayn Rand or anyone like that. But yeah, I mean, according to the Amsterdam Statement, as I've written here, I've quoted it here, humanism insists that personal liberty must be combined with social responsibility. That's precisely what Ron Paul type libertarians don't do. They don't have, they're only concerned with their own liberty. They have no interest in actual everyone else's liberty. So they don't seem to have social responsibility. They want to be able to do whatever the hell they want, immaterial of how it affects other people. So I feel quite justified in saying that particular type of libertarianism is not compatible with, the International Humanist and Ethical Union's Amsterdam Declaration. Now, I think my request for a source here is perfectly reasonable. I don't see there's anything unreasonable about asking for a source. And, well, what kind of response do I get here? I'm not responsible for your basic education in civics and politics. If your culture didn't give it to you, then you have to make up for that deficit in understanding. That's what I'm trying to do, dickhead. I'm asking you to give me a source. I'm asking you to point me in the direction of what I'm missing. If you don't want to have anyone if you want to have anyone take you seriously, good luck with that. No, not really particularly interested in anyone taking me seriously. My views, yes, but I don't have this egotistical problem where I think I need to be taken seriously. I'm a big believer that it's our responsibilities, not ourselves, that we should take seriously. To be honest, I don't appreciate this person's tone. If you're wondering why I'm going on about this, I've encountered this person a few times, and they've always had this very rude, very condescending tone with me that I don't think is appropriate. If they had provided the source I asked for, and I'd ignored it, or not bothered reading it, or dismissed it out of hand, I think then taking this kind of tone with me would be understandable. Because, yeah, then I would genuinely just be willfully ignorant of something, or wouldn't be showing an interest. But for me to ask for a source, I'm trying to open up the lines of communication here. I'm trying to improve communication so that we're on the same page. If this person isn't bothering to do that, then they're not doing nothing more than shutting down communication. And they're not trying to educate, they're trying to condescend. I mean, every time I've encountered this particular individual, they have always seemed to be very determined to put me in my place. I don't know if it's a personal thing with me, or it's just a objection he has to people who have my particular sort of political views or whatever, but either way, it seems very important to this person that they can put me in my place and put me down. This person often has a habit of attributing certain political beliefs, theological beliefs and views to me that I don't actually hold. I find this person very annoying. I don't think I find it very. I'd be very surprised if other people don't agree. I don't think that most people like being spoken to like this. If what I'm saying is, if people want to correct me on this, don't do it like this. Okay, I'm not going to listen to the views of someone who can't be bothered even providing a fucking link, or even mentioning a book that I might want to read. Trying to clobber me over the head with this supposed greater knowledge you have here kind of falls flat if you're not willing to share that knowledge. If you're not willing to share that knowledge, you're not an educator. You're not interested in communication of any kind. You're just being condescending, and you want to maintain that status quo of a bit of condescension. You don't want to give other people the information you have, because then you don't get to be condescending to them anymore. So if anyone out there actually could give me a source about this, I've never really heard humanism defined by that. I have heard humanism used in other contexts, but in the context we're talking about here, I think the Amsterdam Declaration is pretty accurate. So again, I'm not claiming to be an expert on this. I'm willing to listen to what other people have to say, but not if they're just going to, just not even bother providing sources and just be generally rude with me. But yeah. So if you could let me know what you think, everybody. Goodbye.